Welcome back to another Deciduous Bonsai video. My name is Shawn Giles. In this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about autumn work on deciduous species. Here in Melbourne at the moment, it is basically the end of autumn, start of winter already. This is a time where we fertilize quite nicely during autumn to set the buds and future growth up in spring on our deciduous and all of our other species, but primarily our deciduous. It's really important to set up the buds for the coming spring. After we've done that sort of fertilization and the work throughout the rest of the year, autumn is an important time to come through your deciduous pieces, do some bud selection. So we want to come back to twos and pairs wherever possible, and also make some minor adjustments in the tree. It's important to note that we only want to be doing minor pruning. We don't want to be taking off large sections of branches or big trunk chops at this time of year. That's generally better suited towards winter or spring. So in this particular video, we're really only going to be focusing on just our basic sort of pruning techniques for our deciduous species at this time of year. So we have two different species here. These are both client-owned trees, which I thought would be perfect for this video in terms of this trident maple forest just needs very, very minor work. However, this corky bark Chinese elm needs a little bit more work in pushing the branch structure back a little bit. So we will be making some decisions on what to cut back to further back on the branch on the corky bark, whereas the trident maple is just going to be much more basic. We're just going to be removing any dead sections in the tree. You'll see a lot of smaller dead pieces in between all the bifurcations. So we come through and clean those up. We get rid of any long internodes, and we also just cut back to pairs. First up, we're going to get started on the trident maple forest because that's going to be a bit more basic, and then after that we'll move into this corky bark. So the first thing to keep in mind when doing this particular work on a maple like this or any sort of deciduous species, if we're doing a lot of really fine pruning, we have to make sure that we have sharp scissors. A lot of the times, if they're not sharpened correctly, you'll lose contact at the end. If I put these up here, you can see that they're just actually overlapping a little bit, whereas often on some older ones they might just not close well enough, and that's not going to really be of much benefit when doing this sort of work. I'm going to bring you in closer to show you close up of the actual cuts that we're going to make, and you'll see quite quickly where if you don't have an overlap, or at least that they're closing properly, it's going to make this work quite a lot harder than is necessary. So now that I've brought you in close to this trident maple forest, you can start to see the ramification that's in the tree, and there are a lot of fine branching all throughout each of the branch structure. We have to start making decisions in terms of what we're cutting back to and what we're keeping, what we're getting rid of. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, the dead pieces, see on this piece right here, this section is dead, it's whitened off, there's no sort of living branch there, so we can just come through and clean all of that off. That's going to be pretty consistent throughout the whole tree, and generally that's going to be the first thing you do before making any sort of decisions, because a lot of the time it's going to throw you off in terms of you may think that there is an actual twig or an alive twig in that section, when actually it's just a piece of dead branching. We'll go through and clean up all of that pretty easily. At this time of year, it's relatively noticeable what's alive and what's dead. One thing I will also say when you're cutting out this dead middle section is to make sure you're not cutting through any of the buds that are going to be right next to it. Again, this comes back into having really sharp pointed scissors so that you can get right into this section here without damaging anything else, and you can cut that back with relative ease. Now that we've gone through and done all of that work across the whole tree, during that time is the perfect time to then consider what you can start coming back to. Whether it's, a section like this where we have 1, 2, 3 growth extensions or buds appearing in the one area, maybe something that has elongated too much and you need to cut back to that next set of buds. Even something a little bit more developed like in here where you have 1, 2, 3 sections all coming out of the same junction, and looking at going, okay, well, we need to remove at least one of these, and then which one we come back to. That's why I always like just starting off by cleaning out those dead sections on the tree first. It just gets me familiar with the tree and some of the decisions that I have to make in that next step of work. So now that we've actually cleaned the tree out, we can then start acting on some of those decisions that we may have made while doing that cleaning out process. For instance, with this section right here that I just pointed out before, where we have 1, 2, 3 coming off of it. Ideally, you always want to get rid of the thickest section of growth. However, in this instance, we have this piece that comes out here and is quite more elongated than the other two pieces. So in this instance, you would be taking off this section here, and then we end up with a nice bifurcation here, and then we end up with a shorter piece with lots of shorter internodes and buds appearing on that section of the tree. So then we move a little bit further down, and so we have a bifurcation here, and then we have a third one just underneath, which isn't going to be utilized for the design of the tree. So we'll clean that up a little bit, and all of a sudden we have a nice section of branching in there. And we can pretty much do that across the whole tree. Anything that's growing downwards or unnecessarily upwards, we can start to get rid of. Longer extensions like this section here, where you have a bud all the way back here and then a long internode, and then we have 3 buds at the end. We can come back to just that first set of buds and then start to develop it from there. As we move our way around to the back under here, you can see that the strength of the tree isn't quite as vigorous as the rest. We have much less buds and ramification in this section of the tree. So in this instance, I'm really not going to be making too many cuts. I'm just going to allow whatever buds are on here to flush out, just to really try and strengthen this whole sort of section of the tree. In the opposite case, the branch directly above it is really nicely ramified and is taking in a lot of the sunlight that maybe this is lacking. Another thing that we want to keep in mind when we're cutting back to something is future planning for the tree. So we don't want to get rid of buds that are in a good position that are further back on the branch. If they're either in an upright or downright position, that may not be ideal for the future design of the tree. But if it's in a left to right sort of orientation, then you might be leaving that bud on there, even if it's quite congested in the area or it doesn't make sense to the total design and ramification of the branch structure right now. We might be leaving that to have something to cut back to down the track. While tridents and Japanese maples are really good at back budding, we can't necessarily rely on that every single time for that perfect placement of a back bud. So if we have a section of buds or a pair of buds in the ideal position already, we don't necessarily want to get rid of those right now because they may be utilized in the future design of the tree. So another section just here, you have a really nice left and right bifurcation, and then you have an extension of growth through the middle of that. In this instance, we would just cut back to right in the middle of the nicely left to right orientated. So just like that, particularly as we move higher up into the tree too, we want a finer branch structure, and cutting back and allowing that to then grow on is always going to be a nice option. Another interesting decision that we need to make in terms of this branch and the structure that it has here. So we have one section that comes off on the left hand side or the right hand side, and then we have a bar branch right here. In this instance, we already have a section right here of growth. To bring this back to a pair, we would take this section out, and then you have a much nicer branch structure. So we've gone through and done all of the basic pruning and the work that we needed to on this trident maple forest here. Now's also a really good time with all the leaves off and while the branches are still quite malleable in the end of autumn to get some wire onto the tree itself. So utilizing just some basic sort of wiring as well. We don't want to go through and wire too much of a deciduous tree, although in saying that, if you are going to and it really hasn't got much of a branch structure set into position all that much, then now can be a good time, or at least in winter is a good time to go through and wire the whole tree. However, we want to try and minimize any sort of wiring in deciduous species as much as possible, just due to the fact that they have quite a fragile bark and they often bite in much quicker compared to your other species. They're not going to grow as vigorously and as quick as a deciduous tree, so we can allow that wire to be left on for much longer. Whereas on a deciduous tree, any sort of like wire bite or wire marking is pretty tough to get rid of. So we want to try and minimize that as much as possible when we're wiring deciduous trees. I'm going to bring out the corky bark elm and just sort of talk you through the work that we need to do on that particular tree and with that species itself. So as you can see here, we have our corky bark elm. Now this is a particular variety of Chinese elm that has a very pine-like appearance to its bark. So quite sought after in terms of a species to work with for bonsai. Adding on to the fact that it is a Chinese elm, so the growth rate on these things and just the overall hardiness of a species like this is really good for bonsai. So this particular species of tree is a very sought after species for bonsai itself. In terms of this particular tree that's here in front of us, this was originally grown by Tien at Bonsai Sensation in Narre Warren here in Victoria. I may have mentioned Tien before in a couple of videos, if not in probably some future videos as well. Really great grower of advanced stock and some really interesting species too. I myself have picked up one or two corky bark pieces of stock material from Tien, and while this particular piece came originally from Tien, another colleague of mine, Anu, some of you may be familiar with him and his work. If not, I will chuck a link in the bio of this video and also just a link down, let's go like here, of his Instagram so you can check out his work. Now this particular tree, like I said, has been worked on by Anu for the last few years and then was recently purchased by a client of the Chojo Feature Trees nursery. Basically, the work that we're going to do on it today is to just bring it back into shape and really start to compact and make some tougher decisions in terms of the overall silhouette and size of the tree. Now when I say size of the tree, I don't mean height-wise. The height of the tree is pretty much set at the height that it is, slightly larger than a shohin size, I would say. What I mean by size is by actually bringing in the size of the canopy and the overall silhouette of the tree. Now in saying that, I am going to bring you in a little bit closer here and show you exactly what I mean by bringing it in tighter and more compact. And that basically means getting rid of some extensions on the branches, by utilizing some of the back branches that we have already developed on the tree and making that then the, I guess, extremity of the canopy size. So let's bring you in closer and we'll have a little bit more of a detailed look at the branch structure. Now that we're in a little bit closer and you can see the structure laid out in front of you of each sort of branch, you'll start to see quite quickly some options that we can actually come back to that will really compress the overall canopy of the tree. I'll show you this one to start off with right in here because that's probably going to be one of the most easy decisions that we'll make. This long extension out here, while it has some really good branches and bifurcation throughout the whole branch, we have a really good option to come back to right in here. This particular branch here has the possibility to then be wired into place, but just move into that position of this larger section of the branch here, while still having a good amount of secondary and tertiary branches. And again, we'll spin the tree around a little bit here. Very similar thing that we have the branch coming out from the trunk in this area here, coming down, and then we sort of end up with some good branching. We have 1, 2, 3 branches that are really nice. And then we come to this section here, and then we start to lose a little bit of taper across here, particularly from here to here. There's really not much taper at all in the branch structure, and then it comes off at maybe a slightly unusual angle. What this means really is that we can cut this back to this branch right here, and then that can become the main leader. By doing this, we create much better taper, and while it's still quite malleable in its current size, we can manipulate that into a really nice position to then be the end of this branch itself, and then let everything else develop on the tree. As we move our way around the tree, we have more options like this. So this particular branch right here. So while we're compressing and taking things back all around the tree, we also have to do it the higher up we go to make sure that we have that nice shape and design to the overall canopy without it just ended up looking all sort of the same length and size. For this one here, we have this extension that comes out right at the end here, but we have a really nice branch just here that we can then utilize to be that new leader of this branch section here. We would take off this whole section and then just start to come and build off of this. By doing this work, what we are really setting the tree up for is future development. So if we were just to allow this to elongate for another season, maybe another 2 seasons, the size of the canopy and the growth within that canopy and branch structure is going to be really out of proportion to the tree itself. So by doing this work every season or 2 and taking it back to a branch that's further back on that branch structure, it's going to be really important for the future of the tree to keep it nice and compact and to keep it within the same size. We don't want to end up with branches that are, sticking out another 10 centimeters or so, particularly with the Chinese elm, with how vigorous they are. They will explode with growth in spring and throughout the whole growing season if we don't do this work at this time of year. Quite important now to get it back into shape, set it up for the future, and still end up with a really, really nice compact little tree. So all of that work has been done on the tree now, and you can see it doesn't significantly look all that different. However, the silhouette of the tree is just pushed in just to make it a little bit more compact and set itself up for the future. Now what we need to do is just get a little bit of wire throughout the tree and just move those new leaders into a slightly better position, and then that's pretty much it. The work on the tree is done. So I'm going to go through and do all the wiring on the tree now, and we'll come back and we'll see how it looks. Hopefully you can still hear me. It started to rain and it's sort of quite loud on the roof here in the workshop. The work is done now on the Chinese elm. It may not look drastically different in the video here, but it does improve the whole canopy and silhouette of the tree quite dramatically. The structure of the tree is going to be that little bit better as well. So by doing this each year, we're constantly improving the whole structure and ramification, which is all that we want in a tree like this. Now remember, this is autumn time here in Australia and the Southern Hemisphere, so just make sure that you're doing this at the right stage of the year wherever you are in the world if you are watching internationally. That's it for this video. Hopefully you guys learned something out of this that you can then take into working on your own trees and improving your own collection. That's it for now. Thank you for everybody watching, and we'll see you in the next video.